Hey YouTube, Mr. Terry here, back with another History Teacher Reacts video. And today we're checking out a video, I don't think much about history, more about geography, but it's okay. I minored in geography, I'm licensed to teach geography. You can still be here. But anyways, the patrons picked this video this week in this week's poll, and it is the biggest cities over time by Atlas Pro. So I thought this was very cool. I love the idea of growth of cities, and growth of cities is a big part of history and civilization and just cities themselves. So I'm excited to check this out. Maybe a little bit of a change of what kind of we have done in the past. But geography and history are very much intertwined. It's been a major teaching point for me in my career, as I feel they just explain each other quite a bit. So we're going to check this out in just a second. Now, the original video link is down below. Make sure you check out Atlas Pro, check out this video, get the view, like, subscribe, all that stuff. And if you want to get involved in future polls, link to Patreon is down below, as well as our Discord community and some other links that you can find out down there. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So the biggest cities over time. This is part one. Okay, so it looks like this might be multi-part, but let's see what they got.
Important inventions. Made possible by the discovery of agriculture, by living in cities, humans were able to trade their nomadic hunter-gatherer lifestyles to live in a single place for an extended period of time. By collecting our populations into densely organized settlements, humans were able to further specialize into particular trades.
This is what he's talking about here, is the biggest reason why we blend geography and history. Because not a lot of history necessarily changed for specifically humans. You're talking about human history until the creation of civilization and creation of cities. But like he said, none of that would have been possible without agriculture. Agriculture was the thing that allowed humans to end their hunter-gatherer nomadic ways and be able to stay in one place. So over many, many generations, humans found the best possible crops, and through selective breeding, we're able to grow the best types of crops, the best that are best being things that are high in calories per acre. And then along with that was domestication of animals. They went hand in hand there, so you could stay in one place. And then once that happened, people started living closer and closer to that farmland, so people start moving together. And of course, when you get a lot of people moving together, you have to organize people, which is where you get the creation of governments and social structures, and often religions can come from all this stuff. Everything really comes back to this point of agriculture. It's the most important thing that's happened to human history.
This, many inventions and technologies we might take for granted today, like plumbing all the way to grocery stores, came about as solutions to problems unique to city life.
Right.
Living together, we were safe from any predators, had a surplus of food, and began to develop complex societies and cultures.
Yeah, you see what goes on hand in hand too with agriculture was population growth. When you are a hunter-gatherer, living a nomadic lifestyle, you are very much tied to things like climate, for example, droughts, because the hunter-gatherer lifestyle doesn't really allow much for excess food. And a lot of the food that you would get otherwise was not able to be stored. But once humans start figuring out which grains and things like that can be, or just plants in general, can be stored for a long time and able to cultivate it, they were able to store that. And what that did is allowed, if you had a bad season in different times, maybe nomadic times, you could die out. Your whole group could die out. But now you have things to be able to tide you over during those drought periods, which is why you see a skyrocket in population. So we saw a big one there, and then we see it with the further other agricultural revolutions. The one that happened in the Middle Ages, where you get more complex tools and machinery, and then into the Industrial Revolution, which has changed everything as well.
Meaningful art and music could finally take hold, and there was an initiative to create new and useful products for people to use. Writing was invented.
Talking a lot here, but there's just a lot of setup here to make sure you guys understand. When you had that productive of food, right? If you have that much kind of food, and you can do it in one place, you don't need your whole society working on gathering food like you would in a hunter-gatherer society, where you're either hunting or you're gathering food. But since you don't need that, it allows free time, if you will, or at least you don't need everyone in your society to be working on agriculture. So that then allows people the time to work on other types of technologies and inventions, innovations. That's why you see with agriculture, you see new technologies spring up, and some relating to agriculture, some not. And a lot of those new technologies were writing was invented for record keeping, specifically mostly with trade interactions. keeping track of food, for example. So what you're seeing is they call it class specialization, where you don't need everybody is not getting food. You have different types of classes of people, and we live in that today. Today, a very small percentage of people actually work in farming. Everyone works in other things because you don't need that type of percentage of people working in agriculture anymore.
And did first as a means of recording trade transactions, and soon enough we were able to store information outside of our own memories so that people 10, 100, or even 1,000 years in the future could access our accumulated knowledge. In the beginning, few people elected to trade their simple agricultural lives for the hustle and bustle of maybe thousands of people all in the same place. Even as our population started to climb, global urbanization stayed relatively low. That is, until the Industrial Revolution, which drove the masses away from the farms and into the factories.
Yeah. The Industrial Revolution is the point that, for the first time marked in history, people getting out of farming and out of urban living to city living. And today, most people live in towns and cities specifically in those kind of suburbs. It wasn't until the Industrial Revolution that happened. So from the Agricultural Revolution until the Industrial Revolution of the 18th, 19th centuries, most people still lived and worked with agriculture and didn't live in cities. So it's actually still, when you look at the history of humankind on a timeline, urban living is still a very new thing when you look at the history of people.
Soon enough, a small room in a big city held the same value as acres upon acres of fertile land. In 2007, for the first time in human history, over 50%, half of the world population, lived in a city. And today, we're nearly up to 55%.
Yep. And that depends on where you live. I know, like in America, for example, that happened in the United States, that happened in the early 1900s. But again, it depends on where you live. So that's where you get, I think, that percentage breakdown of globally, you're not going to get it until that time. But some countries, the over 50% mark happened over a century ago.
Right now, there are over 4.2 billion people living in a city somewhere on Earth, while only 3.4 billion people live in a rural area. And by the year 2030, it's predicted that over 5 billion people around the world will live inside of a city. Despite the massive number of
That's
people
where
living
growth
in cities
is.
today,
Job
we
growth
haven't
is.
actually been living in cities for too long. Anatomically modern humans have been around for as long as 320,000 years, but the earliest recorded cities date back to as little as 9,000 years ago. From the time the first city began, it was another 7,000 years before a city would reach over 1 million people. Over the course of these 9,000 years,
I want to say first city to 1 million. My gut instinct was saying is Alexandria, but I could be wrong. Let me know if you know. I just think at the top of my head. I used to know that. I know Alexandria was one of those that really had kind of a milestone for population. Yeah.
The honor of the biggest city changed numerous times, sometimes to unexpected places. Some cities that topped this list in the past no longer even exist, while others have managed to remain centers of prosperity for hundreds or even thousands of years. Regardless of their status now, each one for a time represented the collective culture of an entire people group. Knowing that, let's ask, what were the biggest cities over time? Before I start, I just want to give a warning, especially for the earlier cities on this list. Sources will often conflict with one another, and it's difficult for experts to reach a consensus for certain time periods, but I did my best to get the clearest, most definite evidence. Everything we know is based on what we've found in archaeological digs, and there could always be new discoveries that change what we know about the world later on.
You know, history and even study of geography and stuff like this, remember, they're like a science. It's always falsifiable. It's not like mathematics and stuff where you have these laws. Everything is falsifiable. It's just what you know based on current evidence. We should always understand that.
Okay, with that out of the way, let's begin.
Cool.
So it's well known that humans as a species most likely got their start here in Eastern Africa. But as we spread out, it was the Fertile Crescent, what we'd call Mesopotamia, the Levant, or the Middle East, that the first true civilizations were established.
Yeah, the best latitude is right near here in this area. When you look at the major civilizations, they all were founded on very similar latitudes, within about 10 degrees of each other. With that being Egypt, right here, again, look at the latitude. And all in river valleys. River valleys in a similar latitude. So Egypt, which you got over here, then you just go almost similarly, very, very similar in latitude to Mesopotamia. Then you go to Indus Valley, which isn't over here, then over east to China. But that is the best latitude. It's about, 20 degrees north, 40 degrees north, depending on where you're looking at. But you, with that, you have a good seasonal cycle. You get different seasons, which is really important for crops. And also it's a landmass, and that latitude is also in a large landmass where you can travel and trade a lot and similar things. Also how agriculture can spread, because generally speaking, products, food products need a similar climate and seasonal time. And you had that with this line of latitude that happened up here. So that's why people left Africa. You couldn't do agriculture on a large scale nearly as productive as you do these river valleys in this latitude right here.
Today, it looks like a desert, but 10,000 years ago, it was lush with vegetation and allowed early men to prosper.
Very different.
The fertile floodwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers led to many successful agricultural settlements throughout the region.
Especially right between the two rivers.
The first system of writing, cuneiform, was crafted, and history began to be recorded. Around 7,000 BCE, what we could call the first city developed in this region at Jericho, in the modern-day West Bank. People had inhabited this area for much longer, but it was only at this point that their settlements became permanent, and evidence suggests anywhere between 1,000 and 2,000 people inhabited this city. A wall was constructed around Jericho to keep out animals and possibly invading nomads, while within the city, among the homes and other buildings, stood the Tower of Jericho. This structure loomed over the city at 8.5 meters tall and was one of the first structures like this ever built. You might be able to call it an ancient precursor to skyscrapers. But by 6500 BCE, we have evidence that Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey had surpassed Jericho to harbor upwards of 3,000 people, and went on to contain anywhere between 5,000 and 7,000 people in its prime.
There's a lot of cool ruins you can see with Çatalhöyük. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong.
Archaeologists have found very little rubbish inside the houses, suggesting they kept their mud clay homes very clean, and it's thought that people used their roofs as their main living space, even making communal ovens on the roof for several different houses to use. The next evidence for a larger settlement has been dated to 4000 BCE in the city of Uruk. The city likely consisted of no less than 5,000 people. From the name Uruk, the Arabs called its civilization what we'd call Babylonia Al-Uruk, which eventually became the name of the modern-day country the ruins of Uruk are now in, Iraq. This was a very important city for the region and human development in general, and we'll revisit it soon enough. But by 3800 BCE, we have evidence that Dobrovol'dy in the Ukraine hosted around 10,000 people, possibly the first city to ever do so. And
that's nice. I don't know about this city.
Satellite imagery suggests it had the capacity to house over 16,000 people, but by 3700 BCE, it's thought that Eridu, again in Iraq, hosted a similar number of inhabitants. Come 3600 BCE, two more cities, Medinet and Talyanki, both also in modern-day Ukraine, were known to have similar numbers, though it's difficult to discern.
That region is a very important region too, and you look at like Eastern Europe, Central Europe, especially when it came to domestication of things. Like they believe the horse was domesticated in this kind of region, kind of this whole kind of Caucasus region right over here. So that was a very important thing that brought some technologies down south into the larger civilizations.
Each of these cities was the biggest, and they likely traded places often. By 3500 BCE, however, Uruk is known to have climbed to 14,000 people, bringing it back to the top. By 3000 BCE, this number had grown to 40,000 people. 200 years afterwards, this had doubled to 80,000. By this time, several large population centers had sprung up in this region. Lagash in Iraq is thought to have had 60,000 inhabitants at the same time.
Keep getting up there, huh?
Mari in Syria had 50,000 by 2400 BCE. Umma and Girsu both had roughly 40,000 people, and Mohenjo-Daro in the Indus River Valley had a similar population size as well. Uruk
Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, two sister cities in
Mohenjo-Daro
Indus River
Valley had a similar population.
Which really gets an actual like civilization with all the features. If you go by the classical features of civilization, because it had kind of a sister city up north called Harappa in the Indus River Valley, which was one of the best places that any ancient people could settle. These rivers coming off of the Himalayas were very predictable in flooding, kind of like similar to the Nile is in Egypt, and was a huge. I'm pretty sure Mohenjo-Daro was, and for we think with Harappa, that civilization was the largest civilization of the ancient river valley civilizations as far as size goes.
size as well. Uruk began to decline around this time, and it's thought by 2300 BCE, Girsu had overtaken Uruk with about 80,000 people as well. By 2100 BCE, the city of Ur, again in Iraq, had reached 100,000 people, likely for the first time in human history, and replaced Girsu to become the most populous city on Earth. Ur was at first a coastal city, with the Persian Gulf offering access to the ocean, but over time the coastline actually shifted away and left the city far inland. Consequently, the population here dropped, and the capital city of nearby Egypt, Memphis, replaced it at around 2000 BCE, though it only had around 60,000 inhabitants at the time. By 1800 BCE,
you see how climate change affects a lot of this stuff greatly, especially more in ancient times where you are more tied to what nature and the climate and geography has given you.
In Syria had caught up to this number, and 100 years later, Babylon also reached 60,000 people. During this time, again, it's hard to tell which one was the biggest. But by 1600 BCE, a people group known as the Hyksos, who had previously lived in the Levant area, migrated and settled in the Nile Delta region. The city of Avaris was one of the closest settlements in this journey, and the population here swelled up to 100,000 people, making this the most populated city on the planet at the time.
But the Egyptians despised the Hyksos, who had tried to establish their own dynasty in Egypt. So around the year 1550, the Upper Egyptians waged war against the Hyksos and drove them all out of Egypt. And as a result, Avaris was left in ruins without a population.
Yeah, then you get the New Kingdom, so invasion. Because one thing you're going to see is if you have a favorable geography, people are going to be looking to take it. You have to be able to defend it, which where warfare really kind of comes into play, is having to defend your resources.
Capital of Egypt was also switched to Thebes, causing Memphis to diminish as well, and by 1500 BCE, with a population of only around 60,000, Thebes was the largest city on Earth. 100 years later, Thebes remained on top and reached 80,000 people. This city was a great center of Egyptian culture, and many pharaohs chose to be buried near this city in what's called the Valley of the
Temple of Hatshepsut.
Tut's tomb and plenty of others.
First major female ruler in history in the New Kingdom, Hatshepsut.
It's at this point, however, that something important starts to happen among the human population. It'll be slow but massive in scale. Up until this point, the cities have basically been exclusive to the Middle East region, and it's safe to say this was the hub of human activity and the most populated region on the planet. But around the year 1300 BCE, Yunzhou in China surpassed Thebes with a population of 120,000 people, becoming the first city outside this region to hold the title as the world's largest city, and marks the start of the Chinese population overtaking the rest of the world. For the rest of human history, it's basically been a match of tug-of-war between the cities of China and the rest of the world. Yunzhou was the last capital of the Shang dynasty, and archaeologists have discovered several royal tombs within the ruins. But around 1200 BCE, the Egyptian Empire had reached its greatest extent, having expanded both south into Nubia and north into the Levant.
To the headwaters.
This huge expansion was largely due to a single pharaoh, Ramses II. During his reign, he went by the name Usumater Setepener. The first part of this name, Usumater, was translated into Greek as Ozymandias for some.
The Egyptians generally just wanted to stay near the Nile. I mean, it didn't really make sense to really go anywhere else. But Ramses was a conqueror and wanted to create an actual empire of multiple cultures. So going up there, it didn't last too long, though.
Some reason, which is a name you might recognize. In order to better control the northern regions of the empire and protect them from the Hittites, Ramses II founded the city of Pi-Ramesses, very close to where the old city of Avaris once was. This quickly became the new capital of the Egyptian Empire.
You notice the green area here, and this is called the Nile River Delta. The river branches out, and the area between all the little inlets or outlets here, they are very, very fertile regions. So that's the best area, and it's also why Alexander the Great had Alexandria built to what it was, because of its fertility there, as well as, of course, access to the Eastern Mediterranean.
Because of this, its population rose to over 160,000 people, making it the biggest city at the time. Ramses II lived to the age of 90 before dying, and the power of the Egyptian Empire decreased afterwards, causing the city of Pi-Ramesses to decline as well. By the year 1000 BCE, 3,000 years ago, there were 3 cities vying for the top spot. In Egypt, Pi-Ramesses had declined, but Thebes remained with a population of around 120,000, while Memphis still likely had around 100,000. Babylon was also around this size,
Egypt's
and
thriving.
Haojing in China wasn't far behind. By 900 BCE, however, Thebes had further declined, and Haojing had been made the center of the government for King Wu, the first king of the Zhao dynasty, causing the city's population to blow up to
Second
over
dynasty,
125,000, making Haojing
Zhou,
the biggest
not
city
Zhu.
for a time. After King Wu came King Chen, who allowed the city of Luoyi, at the time called Qingzhou, to be built in the eastern part of the Chinese Empire to enforce his control there. After the city was completed, King Chen moved here, and by the time 700 BCE came around, Luoyi in China and Babylon in Iraq were vying for the top spot, as both had amassed 200,000 people. In 500 BCE, the city of Linzi in China, at the time the capital of the state of Qi, had also reached 200,000 as well, and these three cities were essentially even. By 400 BCE, however, Jiangdu was made the new capital of the state of Yan, and as a result,
Warring States
pulled ahead
periods
of the
beginning.
rest and reached 320,000 inhabitants, taking the top spot. Meanwhile, back in the Mediterranean region, the trade city of Carthage in modern-day Tunisia also served as the capital of the Carthaginian Empire, and overtook Jiangdu by the year 300 BCE.
Carthage is an interesting empire because it's really like a naval empire in a way. It's a colonial empire. It's all based on colonies. The actual area around Carthage wasn't very huge in North Africa because of the geography. What made Carthage kind of empire is they had colonies all dotted around the Mediterranean because they were kind of offshoots of the Phoenicians, who kind of had that kind of like a trade empire, if you want to call it that.
Reaching 500,000 or 500,000 people for the first time. Sadly, Carthage posed a huge threat to the Roman supremacy in the region, and the Romans waged several wars against the city, collectively called the Punic Wars. This led to many deaths, and the Romans burned and destroyed many parts of the city, and it's even said that 50,000 Carthaginians were stolen from the city and sold into slavery. Yeah, apparently the Romans did not mess around.
War elephants.
So Carthage didn't last too long in the top spot, and that honor had actually most likely moved to Alexandria in Egypt by 200 BCE, with a population of over 600,000. Alexandria was founded by Alexander the Great in the year 332 BCE and served as the capital of Egypt while under Hellenistic rule. When the Romans took over afterwards, they left Alexandria as Egypt's capital, and the city managed to thrive while under the rule of a foreign empire. By the year 100 BCE, Alexandria reached an estimated population of 1 million people, probably the first city in history to ever achieve this. But right around the year 0, when before Common Era just became Common Era, Alexandria was in
Rome
decline,
time,
and the Roman Empire was prospering. As a result, Rome stole the top spot from Alexandria, also with around 1 million people. Rome held on to this title for several hundred years and served as the shining capital of the Roman Empire until its demise. But
would you have rather lived, if you were out of the 1 million at that time, would you rather have been in Rome or Alexandria? Let me know in the comments.
I'll be covering that in part 2. Sorry, I wanted to make this a single video, but after a certain length, my computer literally cannot render the video. So if you're interested in seeing part 2, make sure you subscribe to this channel.
Get this guy a new
check
computer
back soon. If you're really interested and want to make sure I can get the next video done, you can always support me on Patreon, which allows me to put more time and effort into these videos, as well as improve the production quality of them. These guys and more already have, and it really helps me out.
Patrons.
So thank you to those who already supported me, and there will be a link in the description if you're interested. Other than that, give this video a like, check me out on Twitter, and maybe tell me in the comments if you'd like to see a biggest countries over time video in the future or something similar.
That'd be cool. Awesome. Well, great. Let me know if you'd like to see part 2 in the comments before you leave. I like doing this, especially I think the most interesting part, is the time period they just did. Basically the kind of almost prehistoric through classical era, but definitely interested in continuing on if I want to do that. Hopefully I was able to add a little bit of tidbits of history and why you get some of these population growth and what was going on in the background. You got rise and fall of dynasties like you saw in Egypt, you saw in China. They had to go in Shang and Zhou dynasties, and how the history ties up with that, with the city growth, right? So like the city's growing because a new empire came in and kind of set it as a capital, or vice versa. It's decreasing in population because they got overrun, or the climate change stuff, like they see that. So you can see geography and history are, again, very much intertwined, and I think it's really fascinating to kind of be a part of. I always loved geography as a little kid, and one of the things I like to do, in history that ties to geography is try to imagine yourself in one of these civilizations, in one of these cities. Like, yeah, what would it have been like to live in Rome year zero, or Alexandria, the time of Alexander, right before he died, or right after he died. And it's neat to put yourself in those situations and wonder what that would have been like to be a part. What would a 1 million person city look, feel, act like in the ancient era? Because we know what it's like now, but I wonder how, you wonder how that would be different. I know, like, we think about how dense we live, but I know places like Rome even had more density than like any of the cities that we have today. It's crazy to think about that. And then all the architectural and engineering challenges that come along with that. You can see, like with the Romans, for example, having to develop sewage systems, and how do you get clean water in? How do you get bad water out? And the building of aqueducts, and testing these governments and these civilizations, that can you actually support a city of 1 million? Because one reason that it took so long to do that is because you can't take, I mean, without an extreme amount of planning and engineering, you can't handle a city with that much. You get disease. Again, like you're saying, you got food issues, you got water issues, you got spacing issues, you got all that stuff. And it's a big test of a civilization of, can you actually support urbanization? And that's where you see it with the Greeks or Romans, Egyptians, that kind of thing. So anyway, this was really enjoyable. Let me know if you'd like to see part 2. Let me know in the comments, and that would be very cool. Now, again, the link is down below. Make sure you check that out so you can support Atlas Pro. It looks like they got a Patreon page there. Definitely check that out. If you have to choose between pledging to mine or his, do his there for sure. Anyways, links to other stuff down below, Discord channel, my new gaming channel, other things, Teespring, all kinds of fun things you can get involved down there. Check that out on your way out. And thanks for liking the video. Thanks for subbing, and I hope to see more of you very, very soon. All right, with that, we'll see you later. Next time. Bye.